Well, I'd like to thank everyone for attending the New Frontiers second session. Uh, and I'd also like to thank Mr. Abbey for allowing us to have two sessions. I think if you look at the topics that are listed on session one and session two, the things of interest to the space medical community are really, it's a long list and an exciting list. Everyone has, I think, their individual favorite. Mine is individualized care and offering the best care that we can for crew members when we send them on exploration and missions and when they go to $100 billion facilities. And I think that we can continue to have great impact in that area. I'd also like to thank Serena and Mike for their leadership in putting these two sessions together. Mike gets introduced a lot, and usually at this point in the ISMS, I just say everybody knows Mike and I don't say anything. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to take about a minute because there's maybe some people that would like to follow in Mike's footsteps. Probably he's the premier person in the world now in space medicine. I think it's worth looking a little bit at his background. First of all, he's a good doctor. He did internal medicine and aerospace medicine and became a flight surgeon and worked in operations at NASA. And Mike is the person, along with David Ward, who introduced the U.S. medical system in support of our astronauts in Russia and at the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center. And this was at a time when things were pretty sparse for us over there. And now there's almost a 30-year history of that legacy continuing. He was also selected as an astronaut and has had the advantage of flying on the Soyuz to the International Space Station for a long duration mission, conducting a lot of research, of course, and has also been able to fly on the shuttle. So he has a wide background in his spaceflight experiences. One of the other things, though, is that he also has been involved so much in the research through the Human Research Program, and he was there a year and a half, 2 years running the Human Research Program. So he's extremely interested not only in the medical side and the clinical side, but also the research side. I want to specifically mention his book, Principles of Clinical Medicine for Spaceflight. This is the premier book for our specialty in taking care of crew members. And this is not an easy task, even though he may have 60, 80 collaborators, and they're all very talented and very well-meaning. A lot of them are good between the 20-yard lines, but have some trouble getting things across the goal line. And Mike, to get the book out, I think had to finish several of the chapters himself to do this. A great effort. And if you don't have this book, and if you're interested in space medicine, this is the book to get. But it's that same getting things across the goal line is why the International Space Medicine Summit has relied so much on Mike. He's great in putting the panels together. He's great as a panelist. He knows the scientists. He knows the physicians. And he's been able to get these panels across the goal line many times for the International Space Medicine Summit. So thanks, Mike, and I look very much forward to your panel.
All right. Well, thanks very much, Richard. I guess I'll just follow that up quickly. To the people that are my contemporaries, I think what Richard basically said is I've accumulated a lot of baggage over the last 3 decades. To the young people, I would say there's nobody at NASA who's had more fun than I have, and it hopefully gives you an idea of just how broad space medicine is and what you can do with it. Beyond that, here I'll be, and by the way, I should mention that Richard was my first boss at NASA, and has been a mentorly figure for all of those decades. I'm going to be very brief here since we are very time limited. Hopefully some of you saw our first New Frontiers panel, and I think the idea of a panel with multiple specialists bringing focus to a common topic is very powerful, but this New Frontiers rubric really allows us to inform the human spaceflight community about more standalone activities and advances that are new or emerging. So with this panel, we're bringing together representatives from 3 national space programs, as well as 2 cutting-edge research enterprises. And we're going to drop some new pins on very different but very interesting parts of the map. We have a little less than an hour to do all of this. So we're going to give each panelist about 5 minutes or so to give their micro TED talk. And then hopefully we'll be able to open up for some questions. Now, first will be Dr. Rob Mulcahy. Rob Mulcahy is a NASA flight surgeon who actually studied chemical engineering in undergrad at Rice University before he completed medical school, and then he did his aerospace and internal medicine residency at UTMB. He's our lead for the JSC Flight Medicine Clinic, the lead for the pre-launch health stabilization program, which has taken on amazing new meaning in this pandemic age. And he's the alternate chair of the NASA Aerospace Medicine Board. He provides medical support for our nascent astronaut centrifuge training program and has so far supported 3 of these campaigns with 20 subjects. And he's going to be talking about G training, acceleration training for the new vehicles. So over to you, Dr. Mulcahy.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Barrett, and thank you for having me here. So as Mike said, I'm here today to talk about the reestablishment of NASA's centrifuge training program for the commercial crew era. And as you guys know, our latest launch vehicles like the NASA Orion, the Boeing Starliner, and the SpaceX Dragon bring us back in family with the G loads experienced in the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs. And for that reason, in 2018, the Crew Office established a centrifuge training program for astronauts who will be flying on US crewed vehicles. Through a joint effort between JSC, KSC, and the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the hardware and protocols to support this training were developed. The training is similar to the Russian program used for Soyuz, and also similar to what was offered by NASA during the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, and early shuttle eras. The Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio provides the centrifuge facilities and the personnel. Based on publicly available sources, I can tell you that the Wright-Pat centrifuge has a 31-foot arm radius, which is about 9.5 meters. It can go from 0 to 15 Gs in 1 second, and it can rotate at up to 45 revolutions per minute. Originally, when this program began in 2018, the profiles were designed as a simple, slow ramp up to a moderate GX level with no GZ component. That GX was maintained for 2 minutes and was ramped back down and then up again for 2 similar but slightly higher GX peaks. More recently, acceleration data from SpaceX missions was used to create a realistic profile, at least a SpaceX realistic profile. And of course, as you know, realistic is a relative term because the centrifuge doesn't perfectly simulate linear acceleration. There's always an angular component which plays into some of the medical outcomes. So what does a nominal training day look like for this program? Well, the astronauts would normally travel via NASA aircraft such as a Gulfstream. The pre-spin briefing would be performed on board and en route. So then, once they arrive at the facility, each crew member undergoes a brief pre-spin medical exam with their flight surgeon. The subjects are then sequentially don simulated launch and entry suits and undergo the centrifuge training profiles. During those runs, the control team includes Wright-Pat centrifuge operators, NASA Capcom, who's usually the astronaut overseeing the training program, and a NASA flight surgeon who's monitoring video and audio cues only. And I point that out because unlike our Russian colleagues, we do not perform biomedical monitoring or telemetry during this training because the focus is on G familiarization rather than medical assessment. At the end of each spin, the subject completes another brief medical exam with their flight surgeon. And after all the training is complete for all subjects, generally from 5 to 9 subjects in a single day, the crew debriefs on board a NASA aircraft while en route home. And through massive pre-coordination, all this training can be accomplished as a one-day sortie. Alternatively, the crew may fly themselves to the centrifuge facility in an aircraft such as a T-38. In that situation, of course, the briefings occur at the facility. And due to the potential for neurovestibular impairment after centrifuge spins, all crew members are required to receive a medical clearance prior to acting as air crew for the return flights. And basically, once the gross neurovestibular impacts have resolved, pilots are asked to wait 3 hours before flying, and backseaters are asked to wait 1 hour. In terms of medical outcomes, we had about 40 subjects run through the generic profile that I described earlier, and their symptoms were often related to the duration and intensity of the profile. So the most common complaint was high heat load due to the fact that the launch and entry suit, or the simulated launch and entry suit, is not very breathable, but that was much improved with the addition of a suit ventilation function into the gondola. Of course, at the peak G levels, folks noted increased breathing effort, chest pressure, reaching difficulty, some hot spots, cough, and even paresthesias. And those paresthesias were usually associated with outstretched hands, for example, while working at a control panel in front of them. And then, of course, at transitions, dizziness and disequilibrium were sometimes reported, but almost all symptoms resolved quickly after gondola stop. The flight-like profile was expected and found to be more provocative than the generic profile, and this is due to the numerous acceleration peaks in it. The most provocative motions appeared to be rapid offset of high G loads, so this is things like stage separation or parachute operations. You can tell I'm trying to be general here and not give away any specific proprietary information. The simulated wave state after splashdown was not as provocative as expected, but we did see motion sickness become more evident toward the end of each run, usually associated with the heat load and prolonged exposure to the changing in Gs. But that suit cooling capability did appear effective in reducing the incidence of motion sickness. A majority of the subjects had some transient objective findings in a focused post-spin medical exam. So this is things like nystagmus or disequilibrium, but those quickly resolved. And because this realistic profile was expected to be more provocative, we offered meclizine to all of the 10 subjects who have so far run it, and 6 utilized it, and it appeared to be helpful. In terms of value, this training is felt to be high yield. The flight-like profiles were reported to be quite realistic by experienced crew members. After training, numerous crew members indicated that they felt it was helpful for their familiarization with the mission acceleration environment, and it allowed them to develop techniques for performing reaches and precision cockpit tasks while under G. And despite its more provocative nature, the flight-like profile provides a better understanding of the true acceleration environment for launch and landing, and is the preferred profile going forward. Hopefully I didn't take too long. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks very much, Dr. Mulcahy, and we'll hold questions for the end. I'll just footnote it by mentioning that the new centrifuge at Wright-Patterson actually gives us capability to not only emulate the entry acceleration loads, but we follow that with chute opening loads, and again, as Dr. Mulcahy mentioned, the C state. So it's a very good high fidelity mock-up for us. We're going to switch gears and go over to Dr. Ludmila Borovkova. And let me just mention again that there is Russian translation available to those who are actually running the Zoom app down at the bottom of the toolbar there labeled interpretation. Dr. Borovkova graduated from the Moscow Medical University. She obtained both her PhD and Doctor of Science in Space Medicine at the Institute of Biomedical Problems, well known to us. Ludmila participated in medical support of EVA, ground-based experiments, and the Bion satellite programs. Over 3 decades, she has served as principal investigator, co-investigator, and team leader on the Space Station Mir and International Space Station science programs. From 2001, since then, she's been professor at the Moscow State University and a mentor of the highly productive master's program in space biomedical research at the Faculty of Space Investigation. Ludmila is actually currently deputy director of the IBMP and head of the cell physiology lab. She has been well recognized by the Russian government, the Russian Academy of Sciences, and Roscosmos for her work. Most of us know Dr. Borovkova as just a very pleasant person, but a consummate scientist and educator. And it gives me pleasure to turn the stage over to her to talk about the effects of microgravity on stem and progenitor cells. Dr. Borovkova.
Thank you, Mike, for nice introduction. And I'm glad to participate once more again in Summit, International Space Medicine Summit. And actually, I would like to continue the challenges that Liz described in previous panel. I think that we need to use the approaches of regenerative medicine, and we need to understand the molecular, cellular and molecular mechanism adaptation of stem cells to microgravity. It's very interesting but very difficult question, and many team in US, in Russia, in Europe try to go this way. But I would like also to mention that we need to develop some approaches of regenerative medicine. I mean that we need to use not only cell, but maybe it will better to use in microgravity cell product, like matrix, like microparticles, like interleukin products for many diseases, for many damage, I mean tissue damage that could be in space flight. And also we need to go through genomic and transcriptomic screening. We couldn't answer fast on this difficult question, but we need to study the role of genomic polymorphism, its role in adaptation, human adaptation to microgravity and to another space flight factor. Also, we need to analyze correlation of genomic polymorphism and some risk of diseases, not only during space flight, but also after flight, during readaptation, long-term period of readaptation. Also, I would like to mention that Russian scientists start to go through 3D printing on International Space Station, and young people from 3D bioprinting solution company carried out some successful experiment, and now they have some samples, 3D tissue samples from International Space Station. It's private company, and I think they will continue the experimental research on International Space Station. I would like to mention also two, I think, important challenges, important problems, important questions. One of them is aging human organism during long-term space flight, or some aging symptoms that we observe during long-term space flight. And they're not the same, and maybe not the similar, but the approach is to study senescence of stem cell. And I think when we understand the mechanism of cell senescence, we could more clear understand the aging during microgravity. Also, I would like to thank American scientists to develop and carried out RR experiment on International Space Station. It's really important study, because actually when we received animal from, for example, Bion on maybe ISS on other orbital station, actually we don't understand what we observed. Observed we effect of microgravity, or we observe the effect of landing effect. So RR experiment help us to understand what's happened during space flight, during the microgravity. So I try to keep your time for discuss another question, but I think many questions will have answer when we understand how microgravity affect on stem cell, progenitor cell, and differentiated cell and cell interaction, cell-cell interaction, and cell extracellular matrix interaction. I think this question could help us understand and develop some approaches of regenerative medicine and could help us to improve medical support of long duration space flight. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So a couple of things. I think that for the New Frontiers panel, when we talk about some of these cutting edge areas, we may want to work in developing a literature list, some of the articles that are most recently published on these findings. And I will take that action to try to come up with that and make it available to conference attendees, because there's so much to explore in Dr. Borovkova's talk here. And there definitely is some literature on it that would be useful. Other administrative, I did see your question, Dr. Clark. I inadvertently deleted it, but we use suit emulators to emulate the SpaceX suit rather than the actual SpaceX suit in the centrifuge. However, we'll hopefully be using the SpaceX suit soon. I'm gonna move to Dr. Dervais. And Dr. Dervais is, I think, well known to many in the international MedOps community. He's been a flight surgeon at NASA for over 25 years. He has served during the Space Shuttle, Shuttle Mir, and ISS programs. He serves as the MedOps lead for the EVA Integrated Products team, also the co-chair of the Multilateral MedOps panel. He's currently a vice president of the Aerospace Medical Association, so he's a busy guy. He was the MedOps Commercial Crew Program lead for several years, and most recently, in reward for that work, was the deputy crew surgeon for the SpaceX Demo 2 mission. And so we haven't launched a new spaceship from US soil carrying people for a long, long time. This was a big event that happened just a few months ago, and he'll be talking to us about some of the operational medical support aspects for that first Crew Dragon flight. So over to you, Dr. Dervais.
Thank you, Dr. Barrett. You got me loud and clear, audio and visual?
Loud and clear.
All right, thank you, sir. Well, it's a privilege to be able to share with you a little bit about our SpaceX Dragon mission. This is obviously a talk that could take a couple hours, so in a few minutes we'll distill some interesting tidbits for you here. I work closely with my NASA colleague, Dr. Steve Hart, and for those of you, hopefully you got to enjoy the beautiful launch and landing evolution of DM2. So just to give you a little bit of a background perspective, this was quite of a historic launch. It was the first crewed mission that we've had from US soil since STS-135, and that was in 2011, so 9 years previously. It launched on May 30th from Kennedy Space Center. It completed a 63-day mission, and it concluded with a August 2nd splashdown in the Gulf of Mexico. This was the first splashdown we've had, U.S. splashdown in 45 years since Apollo-Soyuz, and it was also the first one in the Gulf of Mexico. The key component of this test flight was to validate the hardware and the operations necessary for subsequent crewed flights. And of course, it was also executed within light of the global COVID-19 pandemic. And as you know, the next mission is currently slated for November 14th with 3 U.S. crew members and one of our JAXA astronauts. So we're really looking forward to moving on. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a background on some things that we had to address, and also talk a little bit about the launch flow and the landing flow. This development was a synergy over many years of working closely with SpaceX, as now for the first time it wasn't a NASA show. We had to integrate carefully across all the aspects of engineering, medical, and operations. So there a lot of work was put in trying to develop the medical concept of operations. We had to work at training, the support. We had to start integrating with some activities that were at Hawthorne in California, which included spacesuit pressure testing support, integration with their control room, and other aspects that took a lot of coordination was the development of critical things for us, such as flight rules, how we were going to work together, make critical decisions in advance. The technical challenges of looking at issues like impacts, acceleration, cabin environment. Dr. Mulcahy had mentioned the centrifuge training that was added in there as we try to get some experience for the crew on launch entry profiles. And the preventive medicine component was a huge one. The run up to launch, we were obviously trying to protect the crew as best we can, not only the crew flying, but of course the crew members on ISS to mitigate any issues that can be brought up. Over the course of the past several years, we've had all kinds of simulations, activities that we've done on the east and west coast. Off the coast of Florida, of course, we had capsule recovery operations, and working closely with the DOD and the DET-3, looking at medevac capabilities, integrating with the hospitals that could potentially receive patients should we have an unfortunate event, and redeveloping a lot of work that was done at the Kennedy Space Center to modernize and get that facility ready. As you know, we haven't launched since 2011 there, so the Kennedy Space Center astronaut crew quarters facility had to be updated. The medical facility that we have available there had to be reconstituted, so we had all the necessary equipment. So it was quite a challenge, and everyone worked very well together. The run-up to launch, Colonel Benkin and Hurley, they've been engaged with the space program, with the commercial program for many years, and just a few years ago were specifically assigned to the Demo 2 crew. So they have been engaged with a lot of the human factors aspects for both Boeing and SpaceX, but and then particularly focused with SpaceX. Dr. Hart and I were involved with demonstration mission 1, which was an unmanned crew launch. We were down there for kind of a dry run through how we would handle crew members in crew quarters, and then subsequently working up to the launch run here in May. We were in quarantine with the crew members. They were tested for COVID, L-14, L-8, and L-2, as were the support staff as well. The first launch attempt was scrubbed due to weather, and then we eventually had a beautiful launch a couple days later. After about 19 hours, they docked with the space station and joined Captain Chris Cassidy and 2 Russian colleagues there, and were on board for 62 days, performed 4 EVAs, a lot of science. Interesting aspect is because of all the shifting sand, up to a handful of months before, the crew members really didn't know when the launch date was going to be, nor what the extent of their mission was. And that's a little unusual because they weren't sure if it was going to be a few weeks, a month, 2 months, or even a full 6-month mission. But we were prepared for that 6-month support as necessary. Rounding the corner as the mission ended, the crew was coming home. We had done multiple simulations on the vessel called the Go Navigator, and the other one was the Go Searcher, 2 vessels that SpaceX, 170-foot vessels that are related to oil rig operations. So they weren't the big vessels that we used for splashdowns in the Apollo days, such as the aircraft carriers or the amphibious assault vehicles, which is a much smaller footprint, but SpaceX did an excellent job preparing the vehicle to retrieve the capsule, as well as to build a medical canister, a medical facility there that we would work together to take the crew on. We had our challenges as a hurricane called Isaias was coming up the East Coast, which relegated us to decisions to land in the Gulf of Mexico. So the landing took place in August, on August 2nd. That was about 28 miles off the coast of Pensacola, Florida. And we were prepared for some sea states that could be a little rougher within the constraints of the flight rules. However, we were blessed with some pretty calm seas, and then our crew members were not there for a full 6 months. So we appropriately utilized fluid loading protocols for our crew members with some medications that we used for the downhill run. They did wear some orthostatic intolerance garments. That was a big collective effort to help make sure we had that capability and available for them. And when they landed, the sea states were very calm. The 4 chutes performed well. It was a great landing. And Doug and Bob mentioned that the there was some opacification of the windows when they landed because of the plasma entry. So they really couldn't see out and see the horizon, which they thought might have actually been beneficial to them feeling pretty good when they landed. But the sea states were calm, but the worst variance into that was the fact that unbeknownst to a lot of us 28 miles off the coast, a number of civilian fishing vessels and pleasure boats, people out for the day, saw the capsule come down and they start zipping around like a shark, if you will. And so there was a little bit of motion added to the crew. So the sea states were good, but those folks were, the Coast Guard couldn't shoo them away fast enough. I'm sure that'll be taken care of and not be a factor for the next mission. Subsequently, the crew was brought on board, and Dr. Hart and I worked real closely with Dr. Menon and their team. We had a lot of work in advance to make sure that we totally understand the rules of engagement, how we're going to take care of our crew members, and all the equipment we had, the procedures, the protocols, and we knew that we would collectively be given very good medical care, and we did. We subsequently, because of our distance offshore, we helicoptered the crew members to the Naval Air Station at Pensacola, Florida, where a NASA Gulfstream awaited us. The most interesting part next, of course, was a short transit. We were back in Houston within 90 minutes of landing on the shore, which is very different than the 24 to 26 hour evolution that Dr. Chancellor, Dr. Menon, Dr. Barrett and others had to experience coming home. So we got them back to Houston, a short public affairs event with some senior folks, and then over to crew quarters where we also had the opportunity to start our science, our medical work, and keep them in a quarantine-like environment until they were cleared. So tremendous lessons learned on this mission. We had excellent synergy with our counterparts. We learned a tremendous amount. We were definitely prepared for bad sea states and very provocative inputs to the crew members, but we were very blessed. They did exceptionally well, and really looking forward to engaging our international partners forthcoming. Thank you, Dr. Barrett.
All right, thanks, Dr. DeBate. This is obviously a really big, exciting thing for us. We haven't dropped people in the ocean for a long, long time, and this is a new cadence we have to develop. And eventually we'll be dropping very deeply deconditioned people in the ocean. So a lot of new things for us to work out the cadence of, but again, many thanks for that. Again, a bit of a gear shift. We're going to go to Dr. Kristen Fabre. Dr. Fabre is Chief Scientist at the Translational Research Institute for Space Health. Most of us know that as TRISH. She's also Assistant Professor at the Center for Space Medicine at the Baylor College of Medicine. Dr. Fabre joined TRISH in December of 2018 as a Senior Innovation Scientist and was promoted to Chief Scientist in May of 2020 this year. She leads the TRISH Translational Program, which is tasked to invest in high-risk, high-reward research and technology for space exploration. And I think she'll be helping to continue the thread from the first panel talking about tissue engineering models. So we look forward to your message, Dr. Fabre.
Absolutely, and thank you for the introduction and the invitation to this panel. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. So just again, a brief reminder, I think, Mike, you set this up a little bit for what is TRISH, but for those that are a little unfamiliar with what our institute is, we are the Translational Research Institute for Space Health. So we're not NASA, but we actually do partner with NASA through a cooperative agreement. And we're headquartered here at Baylor College of Medicine, but we also do have our consortium partners over at MIT and Caltech. So we do try to have a broad reach across the country. And really our primary goal is to support the human research program on being a funding agency of our own, where we are going out and looking for those disruptive technologies or for technologies that have already been established but can be modified for space health, all really within the focus of how do we maintain our health on the way to Mars and back. Also not only just physical health, but behavioral health as well. And really allowing ourselves to challenge the boundaries of how we do this. And so being an innovation institute isn't just the science that we fund, but it's how we go about doing it. So there's a lot that we could talk about, but again, we only have 5 minutes. So one of the ways that I'd like to talk about our initiatives or what we think about as a priorities is not only for risks that we really know we need to address, like radiation, space radiation in particular, galactic cosmic radiation, but also how can we develop tools to help us prepare for the unknowns. And listening to the conversation from this morning, it's been a really nice setup on what we should be talking about here today. And what I would like to focus on for the rest of my time is an effort that we're putting together on how do we personalize our approaches for space for anyone. So anybody who's interested in going to space, anybody who wants to go into space exploration, what type of risks are you going to be susceptible to? And also what type of countermeasures would be the most effective for you and safe for you to take? So what we'll focus on here are an avatar approach. And so when I talk about an avatar, we're talking about tissue chips or organoids or stem cells from individuals, but also in silico. So how can we look at some of these tissue chip technologies and get data to inform what would happen to an individual in the context of risk for space flight, but then also feeding that into in silico modeling and having that inform these models on what could be predictive for these individuals. The more that we get, the more data that we get, the more we can feed into these models. The more models that we have for stronger prediction, the more eloquent and complex our questions can go back into tissue chips, and it would be a positive feeding loop. So let's go to this. And the reason why I wanted to put some slides together is because I think that tissue chips are such a visual thing. And for those that are still trying to understand what a microphysiological system is or a tissue chip, they really are about engineering and combining engineering to tissue chip and stem cell technology, and being able to capitalize on the stem cell technology and inducible pluripotent stem cells, we can really start to think about how we individualize these approaches for space health and for space flight. So yes, oftentimes they will have a mechanical scaffold. They will be multicellular, so they will include all of the different cell types that would be captured or relevant in a microenvironment of a tissue or organ of interest. I have an example here of a tissue engineered capillary showing you the functionality of this, looking at fluorescent micron-sized beads. And for this, I wanted to highlight that we actually do have an initiative that we are starting recently. We have just announced our selection for 5 individuals who are actually going to look at tissue chips for radiation and radiation studies. And really the heavy emphasis here is going to be on galactic cosmic radiation or secondary types of radiations that can be present, like neutrons, for example. So the first question really is to say, okay, these technologies are interesting. They've been flown into space. NCATS, NIH was mentioned by Liz, their partnership with the ISS National Lab. So we were actually able to start seeing how tissue chips can be used for disease modeling, for drug development, for chips in space. Now let's focus on this for looking at radiation and galactic cosmic radiation, so or high LET. And then let's add a little bit more to this. So what kind of countermeasures can we throw at these devices once we establish them as an actual physiologically relevant analog to your human physiology for a Mike Barrett vasculature system, for example? So not only do we want to think about nutraceuticals or compounds like drugs that pharmaceuticals that we're trying to develop, but also unusual approaches. So how can we look at nucleic acid therapeutics or genetic editing or different approaches to shielding our materials to see how we can address the radiation risk problem for space exploration. And then once we get our hands around that, we want to take this even further. And so this kind of goes to the question earlier about chips on the moon and how can we take these avatars, how can we take your kidney on a chip or your blood-brain barrier on a chip, or maybe have them connected so you have all of the relevant tissue chips connected together to have a you on a chip, including reproductive systems and hormone response, because I think that sometimes gets overlooked. And how could that go into an outer Earth orbit, or say on the lunar surface, and be exposed to an actual GCR for a period of time, something that can be automated and sustained for, say, 6 months to a year, where I can pull data from my phone and say, okay, what is my kidney on a chip doing today? How is that going to impact, or what tissue impact or function is being changed because of exposure to GCR? And not only that, but also having the automation capability to introduce countermeasures to see if we can protect that tissue function at a given time, completely automated. So that means that we would need to have better engineering in terms of the robust platforms for tissue chips, long-term viability for tissues, real-time readouts and imaging, and a whole bunch of enhanced capabilities in addition to our unusual approaches to countermeasures. But we think it can be done, and this is actually something that we're going to start to build as we start to introduce our tissue chip initiative, and this will be our logical next step. So if you're interested in partnering with us or trying to understand where we're going with this, I'd be happy to talk about this more offline at another time. So not only are we thinking about tissues, personalized tissues as an avatar, but we're also thinking about how can we do this in silico. And so can we create this digital human framework for personalized training and simulation? And there's a company that we've actually partnered with called Level X to do just that. Now these are initial steps to look at how the environment will impact the astronaut. How does the heart tissue change in microgravity versus here on Earth? Being able to recreate a high fidelity approach to ultrasound so that we can help with training or help prepare for medical scenarios that might not be expected, but we can do these trainings and these simulations on the fly when needed. And so that's our initial step. But now what we want to do is start to continue to collect data from this so that we can continue to feed this framework with more information so that we can really have a robust, reliable, personalized avatar to read out these different components. And so again, going back to what are the risks that you're going to be susceptible to, and what are the countermeasures that are going to be the most effective and safe for you. So I think I will leave it at that as a kind of a flavor for what we're doing next, and hopefully there'll be some questions about what we're thinking about for tissue chips with radiation and chips on the moon.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fabre. I've definitely got a couple of really burning questions, which I'm going to defer. But again, I think we will try to make sure that we have some portal information, if not some literature available for people that are interested in unpacking this a bit further. Your visuals are very powerful, by the way. I'm going to switch next to Dr. William Lee. Dr. Lee is an internal medicine physician. He's a vascular biologist and innovator at the Angiogenesis Foundation. This is a medical science organization focusing on common denominators of disease and health. His work has ranged from cancer prevention to regenerative healing to slowing the pathologies of aging. Some of this obviously has very close parallels to long-duration spaceflight. His current focus is on applied molecular nutrition to prevent human disease. In May, Will and his group made a seminal discovery that led to the recognition of COVID-19 as a vascular disease. Some of you who nervously follow the COVID literature as we do may have seen that missive in the New England Journal of Medicine in May of this year. He's now working with the FDA, the NIH, and international collaborators on solutions that can not only help this pandemic, but future ones to come. And we've asked Dr. Lee to come and talk about nutrition for long duration and exploration missions. So over to you, Dr. Lee.
Good morning. Thank you, Mike. And I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to participate in this really outstanding program. My background is in vascular biology and mapping out common denominators of health and disease. And I think it's highly relevant to everything I've heard this morning in this and earlier sessions. Now, I started my work in the field of angiogenesis, blood vessel growth, which has already been mentioned. My focus initially was in cancer, wound healing in the eye, and in cardiovascular health, mostly through biopharmaceuticals over the last decade. But we have now pivoted to studying how nutrition impacts the body's physiological defense systems responsible for maintaining stable health. And what this means is that we're examining food as part of a dynamic system of cellular responses. Specifically, the defense systems I've been working on are the vascular system, adult stem cells and regenerative systems, gut bacteria, DNA repair mechanisms, and immunity. Now, these 5 systems actually found already serve as countermeasures against aging, disease, environmental exposures, and they protect us against lifestyle-related harms here on Earth. And so the question is, what can they actually do for us during space travel? And in fact, they respond to nutrition as well. And what we eat and the quality and quantity of that actually can impact on these systems. So as we've discussed, long duration spaceflight is going to impose unique challenges on human health, and our current experiences predict that countermeasures are going to be needed to counter the deleterious effects potentially of microgravity, galactic cosmic radiation, and other stressors. And we know already that some of the factors that nutrition can impact on through these defenses have already been seen. For example, changes in circulation and blood volume distribution, modifications in the ability of tissues and cells to regenerate, as we just discussed, changes in the makeup of the gut microbiome, which have been published from space studies, DNA repair mechanisms, and immunity. So what I want to do with my time is to tell you how this fits in with nutrition, because the traditional views of nutrition is really focused on energetic requirements for sustenance and supplementation of well-known micronutrients. But emerging data shows that single and combined whole foods and the bioactives that are present in them, these are plant-based foods, animal proteins, and beverages. Now, there's going to be limitations to how much can be carried along, but you can extract these. These factors can activate cellular responses in a systems-based approach to alter our physiology, and we should be able to exploit these for space travel. For example, the phytoestrogens present in soy and the carotenoids present in tomatoes have been found in human studies to suppress cancer growth by cutting off the blood supply to tumors. Cacao flavanols have been shown to improve vascular function by mobilizing bone marrow-derived stem cells. So you don't need a chip. These are already present in the astronauts that are going to be up there. A natural compound called NBP is found in Chinese celery and can improve brain blood flow. And in fact, this NBP has already been developed in China to treat stroke patients. So the need for countermeasures to look at radiation carcinogenesis, which may be necessary to protect DNA from damage. For example, human studies looking at kiwi fruit has been shown that eating 3 kiwis a day can not only reduce DNA damage, but it can increase DNA repair by 66%. So what's the mechanism of this? And what are the elements that we might need to be able to extract and concentrate to protect people during long-term space travel? There are also certain foods that target cancer stem cells. And these are the cells from which tumors arise, and also how they recur from successfully treated cancer. Remarkably, black tea, coffee, and prunes contain factors that can kill lung cancer cells, colon cancer stem cells, and breast cancer stem cells, respectively, along with other food substances. And as Mike mentioned in my introduction, since the pandemic began, we've also been looking at new angles in diet and immunity. So beyond vitamin D supplementation, which has been frequently cited, we've also found other really noteworthy dietary mediated effects. For example, white button mushrooms increase salivary, IgA secretion, broccoli sprouts and blueberries can enhance natural killer cell activity. Green and black tea increase gut bacteria associated with antiviral cytokines like interferon gamma. And kelp contains a polysaccharide that interferes with the spike protein ACE2 receptor binding. So better immunity protects us from tissue damage caused by pathogens. And you know, the SARS-CoV-2 is a new pathogen that we encountered on Earth. And my group's been looking at what COVID does in the lung. And so I wanted to just share with you a quick image that some of which have been published, some of it hasn't. But if you take a look at this slide back here on the left, this is normal microcirculation corrosion casted from human healthy lungs donated for lung transplant. Beautiful vascular arcades wrapped around alveoli. And on the right-hand side, you can see what SARS-CoV-2 does to the lung. It infects the vascular endothelium and destroys that function. And so this is actually leading us to look at this in greater detail to understand how perturbation of the microcirculation can cause damage, and not just in the lung. We're also finding this in the heart. On the left-hand side of these beautiful pencil-like capillaries feeding healthy myocardium. On the right, you can kind of see the damage from SARS-CoV-2. So we're actually now looking at dietary factors that can protect blood vessels and reverse the damage to endothelial cells that we've actually seen infected. And the emerging lessons from COVID will be instructive for applying molecular nutrition to protect vascular health and potentially immune function during space travel and future planetary settlement. So collectively, this data that's being put together, which has been referred to as a food as medicine movement, we think can improve food systems for space flight, from food selection to storage, preservation, preparation, and nutrition. So I'll conclude with 5 things that I think could be considerations for molecular nutrition for long-term space travel. First, we need to actually develop methods to monitor human health metrics that were mentioned yesterday that reflects how nutrition affects physiological changes at the cellular and molecular level. And we can collect these samples from breath, saliva, nasal swabs, blood, urine, and other human samples. Nutritional countermeasures also need to be modeled using the principles that have originated in biopharmaceutical development, like immunotherapy, angiogenesis modulation, regenerative cell therapy, gene therapy, and microbiomics. Supplementation is inevitably going to be useful for optimizing performance of health defenses, but these really need a rigorous framework for development. And we need to actually combine dietary bioactives found in whole foods and go beyond simple micronutrient supplementation. And then another important direction is the biofortification of food, so we can get the greatest effect out of our foods. Not all foods are created equal. There are tomatoes, varietals that have the highest levels of lycopene. Potatoes have the highest levels of anthocyanins. And in fact, the potency of foods can be enriched with breeding and genetic optimization. In fact, potatoes are already now being biofortified in Africa to better nourish communities during the pandemic. So if we want to engineer the best of everything when it comes to space travel, then nutrition is going to have to join that league. And then finally, food has to have taste, not just good taste, but great taste. Food's not just a delivery system for micronutrients to activate health and combat disease, but it's a source of pleasure and a stimulator of desire. Food connects us with our fellow humans, our communities, and our cultures, and the importance of enjoying our food is going to be important for us, whether we're in space or on Earth. And so wherever humankind journeys into the future, the need for food that's not only good for us, but that we enjoy and look forward to is part of who we are. So I look forward to collaborating with leaders and continuing the discussion on nutrition and regenerative medicine and healing and health physiology and space programs. And I will conclude there.
Okay, thanks very much, Dr. Lee. Again, a lot to unpack. I'm just thinking back to ages of exploration where food is just necessarily austere because of the environment that we're entering and the way that we carry it. And I'm thinking of citrus and scurvy and ways to protect ourselves. So I would say we're somewhere between your Whole Foods model and the venerable ship's biscuit. And so I think that's a great segue over to Dr. Grace Douglas, whose job it is actually practically to feed people as they're heading out into the solar system. I definitely see the idea of an evolvable system of providing the micro and macronutrients that you're talking about as something we should always keep in mind from the very beginning. Dr. Douglas serves as the lead scientist for NASA's Advanced Food Technology Research effort. This focuses on determining methods, technologies, and requirements for determining a safe, nutritious, and palatable, taste is everything, food system that will promote astronaut health during long-duration space missions. Her responsibilities include assessing the risk of an inadequate food system to crew based on vehicle design and mission concept, and developing the research path that will ensure the food system meets crew health requirements on spaceflight vehicles. She has a bachelor's and master's in food science from the Pennsylvania State University and North Carolina State University, and her doctorate in functional genomics from North Carolina State University. So over to you, Dr. Douglas.
Hello, I think you can probably hear me right now. I'm trying to get my camera to turn on.
Further, we definitely have you loud and clear. Just
okay. I'm not sure. Okay. I think it's going to show up in a moment. Hello. All right, great. So thank you for inviting me today, and I'm happy to talk about some of our challenges as we're developing food for these exploration missions. And thank you, Dr. Lee. That was an excellent preview of the importance of food for spaceflight. And also, we do want to start looking at whole foods and providing a countermeasure to crew as they go on these longer duration missions. And we have several challenges with this. So when we're looking at providing nutrition in an acceptable way and in a safe way, right now all of our foods are either freeze-dried or thermostabilized, and they need a shelf life for the International Space Station of at least 1.5 years. When we go on a Mars mission, that's probably going to extend to up to 5 years, because we do have challenges as far as getting enough food made to launch. It has to get to launch ahead of time. By the time it's launched into orbit, it might end up being pre-positioned ahead of even crew selection. And therefore, we have challenges even as far as providing crew preference on those future missions, which right now the International Space Station does have some crew preference. They get a standard menu where all the crew are choosing foods out of the same supply, but then they get some crew preference on top of that. And on the International Space Station, they also get some fresh produce, apples, oranges on regular resupply vehicles. And a lot of that's going to be going away with longer duration missions. So we do have a stability challenge. We do see some nutrients in our food degrade over time. And we do know that we want to provide a whole food system for multiple reasons. One of those is that a whole food system can provide thousands of bioactive compounds, as we've heard, that can promote all kinds of aspects of health, and we're starting to really begin to understand those now. And we need to be able to stabilize all of those foods within that 5-year time frame. So that's really our big challenge. How do we do that? We also do see the acceptability of our foods decrease over time, which is another really big challenge, because we know that as the missions get longer and further from Earth, the food becomes more important, and having food that they want to eat becomes more important. So there's actually another challenge with providing food as a countermeasure. There's a lot of really great foods as far as providing countermeasures, but can we stabilize those for these long duration missions? And will the crew choose to eat those? So one of our big challenges is how do we find a variety of foods that fits within this closed system without crew preference that most people would want to eat, that provides the variety that individual crew members can find the foods that they want when we don't even know who those individual crew members are going to be, and they can find foods that they want that provide the nutrition that they need ultimately to support their crew health and performance. And that's within a very restricted resource constraint. So when we look at that resource constraint, right now we do have a prepackaged food system. It's very high in mass and volume. And for the upcoming missions right now, we are challenged to reduce that mass and volume. And the real challenge is that if we even look at other systems, so can we grow crops? Can we start integrating some other systems where we start growing foods in situ or providing foods in situ? Right now, those systems are not developed to a point where we can rely on them. Even the crop systems that we have right now, we cannot rely on. So we do want to start working on those technologies and being able to integrate those things. But the resources are really the big challenge. So right now, the mass and volume of the food system, and if we look at other systems, how do they integrate with the water system, with the air system? What kind of volatiles are they producing? So all of those things have to be considered in a closed system when we're developing any sort of food system. But the biggest challenge right now, even for the prepackaged foods, is the mass and volume, the loss of stability over time. We can look at providing refrigeration or cold storage, which could enable us to have a longer stability shelf life, but refrigeration adds a lot of resource challenges as well. So if we look at just having 1,000 kilograms of food refrigerated, it takes an extra 400 kilograms of mass. And we get the comment, well, isn't space cold? Well, it depends on the orientation of the vehicle to the sun, and we would need sun shields and other types of protection from the vacuum of space for the food system. So there's a lot of challenges in that would have to be weighed against mass and risk that's added to the mission. So just a lot of challenges still for this food system in order to provide it in a way that we can support crew health and performance and provide all those bioactives and get crew to want to choose the foods that have those bioactive compounds by making that stability and quality acceptable, even if we do have to process them into freeze-dried and thermostabilized foods for the lengths of these missions. So I think that's probably a good summary of our challenges of the space food system, and I'm happy to take any questions.
right, thanks very much. We will move on real quick, but I will point out that of all the human risks that we've had, the food system has been one of the top risks of our Mars designed reference missions for all of these reasons. And so we cannot really underemphasize the importance of the food system and what work there really is to be doing on that. Next, we're going to Dr. Maybrit Kuipers from the European Space Agency. Dr. Kuipers is a flight surgeon at ESA in Cologne. She has formal training in emergency and wilderness medicine, and she's well known actually to both the spaceflight and the extreme medicine communities. She's a co-founder of the Dutch organization Outdoor Medicine, which promotes international cooperation in expedition and extreme environment medicine. She's pretty much at home anywhere on the planet, whether polar, tropical, mountain, or ocean. She was the principal support physician for Luca Parmitano's recent ISS expedition. And in her abundant spare time, she's nearing completion of her PhD work. I should have mentioned the same is true actually for Dr. Sergey Nazarov, who joined us yesterday. And by the way, they both have very young children, so these ESA flight docs don't mess around. Dr. Kuipers will be talking to us today about new ESA technology for astronaut health. So over to you, Dr. Kuipers.
Thank you very much for that very wonderful introduction and the opportunity to present today. So right off the bat, when we do exploration, we need to prepare for more autonomy for the astronauts. And when we do that, we need to make sure that they have reliable, durable, versatile, and compact equipment. This is to enable them to monitor their health, nutritional status, but also stay healthy and fit, doing exercise. So today I will present some of the new ESA medical tech developments, and some of them are actually already using today. First off, Tempus. So Tempus was developed by a UK company called RDT together with ESA Tech Directorate, and it's a very compact, robust medical monitor which can operate under extreme temperatures and is also very water, dust, and shock resistant. It records all kinds of vital signs, including 12-lead EKG, pulse oximetry, blood pressure, capnography, temperature, you name it. And it has some very neat plugins, for example, ultrasound. And they also built in a guidance for non-experienced users. And it has other add-ons like video laryngoscope and a defibrillator. So it's very, very compact and I would say very versatile and robust. Other things that you can do with this device is keeping a medical record, keeping track of everything you do to the patient and what medications you are giving them. And it has a camera built into it. So you can actually do telemedicine with it. So there is audio and video, and it is able to make a connection through a satellite telephone or 3 or 4G network. And you can communicate with your home base. And it also pushes the data, that all the data, vital signs, etc., it collects automatically and in an encrypted way to your home base, basically. So we've been using it in the field. As you can see here, you see one of my colleagues using the device during a Soyuz landing on one of our ESA astronauts. And we hope in the near future to also do a tech demo on the ISS with this device. So that will be interesting to see. Everywhere. Everywhere is a software application developed together with CNES, the French space agency, and the software developer is MEDES. It's a software solution really created to help with crew medical support and research, human research. So it provides data recording and processing capabilities, and it has a very intuitive user interface. So the astronauts have it available already on the ISS, on their iPads, and this is kind of the layout that they see and the options that they can use. We started back in increment 49 with Thomas Pesquet, I think it was, yes, and with the nutritional assessment, so basically daily logging of fluid and nutritional intake. So we could actually see how many calories he was eating each day. And since last year, so the last mission that I supported with Luca Promitano, we started using the science support tool, and we did a fully operational checkout of the medical module, which basically allows for medications recording, symptoms recording, but also messaging with the surgeon in an encrypted fashion. And so that's been working really well, and we're continuing the development of this app with the feedback of the crew and the ground. And so it's getting better and better as we use it more and more. The third and last one that I will present today is E4D. You may have heard of it. It's the European Enhanced Exploration Exercise Device. It is quite neat. It's been built by the Danish aerospace company for ESA. It combines rowing, resistive exercise, cycling, and rope pulling all in one device, which of course greatly reduces mass and volume compared to the systems we have on board the ISS today. And it's built in a modular fashion, also kind of keeping in the back of the mind if something breaks that you still can use parts of the device and do some maintenance on other components. It can also work in an unpowered mode, and it still gives you the options to do basic cycling, rowing, rope pulling, and some of the resistive exercise capabilities. In its stowed config, it occupies about 0.272 square meters, so that's about 26.6 square feet, which is quite compact, and it weighs about 125 kilograms or 275 pounds, which is, you know, it's still a lot of mass, but it's, compared to what we have, quite light. And we plan to fly it to the ISS and have it operational by the end of 22. So coming to a space station near you soon. So I try to really keep it short and sweet. This is actually the conclusion of my short overview of these three medical technologies. And thank you very much for your attention.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Kuipers. I know that we're bumping on to the next panel. I'm just looking for a sign from the overlords here as to whether we can push on, and I think I see that we can. So I appreciate that. Again, there's a lot to unpack here. There's some information we can give to point to some of these technologies that Maybrit answered or talked about. I didn't realize that Tempest Pro might be heading to the station, so that's actually very good news. I'm a bit of a fan of that system. So I think then we will move on to our last speaker, which is Dr. Serena Auñón-Chancellor. She's also been introduced a few times already, so I'll try to skip some of the things that are a little bit mundane. We all know she's a NASA astronaut and medical doctor with a background in electrical engineering, training and certification, internal and aerospace medicine. She had, you know, this large interest in radiation biophysics, but didn't really have time to get a degree in it. So she married one of our lead radiation researchers, Dr. Jeff Chancellor, to check that box. She joined the astronaut corps in June of 2009. Actually, I was halfway during my first flight when that happened. You know, you leave the planet for a few months and all hell breaks loose. But anyway, it was kind of fun to welcome her to the astronaut office from space. She has spent time at the Aquarius habitat in Antarctica, but she still keeps showing up back at NASA. So we launched her into space a couple of years ago to fly a 6.5-month mission as part of expeditions 56 and 57. She's now dividing her time between the NASA astronaut office, Louisiana State University Medical School, and the University of Texas Medical Branch, where she's working with the aerospace medical training programs and the private astronaut enterprises. So it's probably clear that it's hard to find enough to keep her sufficiently busy, but we do our best. So she's going to talk a little bit about the behavioral health challenges and research and countermeasures need to think about the exploration class mission. So take us home, Serena.
All right, Mike, thanks for that intro. And I'll try and keep this short just because I know we are butting up against, we've got some extra time, but it'd be great to answer some of the questions coming from the audience. I love the New Frontiers panel because it allows me to pick a topic that I don't feel anyone else has hit upon. So very briefly, I wanted to talk about some of the behavioral health challenges that I think we're going to face as we push on, certainly to go back to the moon and on towards Mars, and as our missions increase to lengths of time that we have not yet seen. So we've gotten really good in low Earth orbit with behavioral support of the crew member or the crew member's family. I could call my husband every day. It sounded like a cell phone call. I got video calls on the weekend. We had movies, you know, uplinked to us within a moment's notice if we wanted to watch them on orbit. Cargo vehicles that were up and coming, we could request certain food items on those cargo vehicles. And I was really glad to hear folks talk about food. Food is a huge behavioral motivator on orbit. Coffee as well. Don't mess with the coffee. So, you know, you look at how this robust system we have developed in low Earth orbit for 6-month missions, or Kate Rubins, who just launched, maybe up there for, you know, up to a year. And I think we do a really good job supporting the crew member. And simply the fact of every day I could go out and stare through the cupola back at our planet Earth was tremendous. I could live stream radio stations from Washington, D.C., where my family was located, and hear the same news that they were hearing. These are all huge behavioral motivators. We've gotten pretty good at managing sleep and chronic fatigue during these long duration missions. Really good at 6 months. We've had a few folks fly a year. We don't have hardly anything past that. So the one thing that the crew and we talked about a lot as a crew of 6 up there, many nights over dinner, or on the weekends, we talked about how crews would fare once those missions got longer and longer, and as we traveled out further and further away from home. We talked about our 2 big components of self-care and team care, recognizing that your behavior always impacts others, and then recognizing how to modify that or how to help out your buddy when they're having a bad day. And a lot of it is just a lot of self-insight, self-awareness. We frequently discussed these topics because we felt like the interactions we had amongst our crew were so positive, and we really felt like one family. We discussed why that was. Conflict resolution, this is huge. It will come up, and usually it's not big conflict, it's conflict over little items like how you tie down the ARED rack with the Velcro straps and how it's annoying to other people. It's something very small that after long periods of time could set someone else off. So we discussed those things. We talked about how would a crew potentially halfway out to Mars deal with a loss at home, the loss of a spouse, the loss of a child, the loss of another family member, huge events happening on the planet's surface. So we talked about that one term that you hear a lot that's being thrown around a lot nowadays, and that's resilience. How do we make crew members, people, more resilient to an exploration class mission? And I think that comes from several factors. There's not just one thing that you can do. So I felt like analogs were a huge benefit to my personal training before flying into space. I did have the pleasure of really living on the ice, sleeping on the ice for 2 months, about 200 nautical miles from the South Pole. So no kidding, isolated, tip of the spear. I've never felt like I was on another planet until I went to Antarctica. I learned about behaviors in myself, what was important to me, how I slept in those environments, how I ate. And I will tell you, for me, they translated directly over to ISS. The same issues as I saw with Nemo, living in an underground habitat, dealing with a pseudo mission control. The same behaviors that developed in the crew. I was surprised, a lot of those same things we saw on board ISS. So just as a final few thoughts, how do we prepare crews for these exploration class missions? You know, we have to think about things like training them in meditative techniques, self-reflection, analyzing your behavior. Do we take the physician that will likely be on this exploration class mission and give them more training in behavioral techniques? What if it's the physician that needs help in this area? How do we utilize the people that we are flying for 1 year now and take those experiences and create those research protocols and programs that we're going to need in order to get us out safely to Mars? So final parting thought, I think our early explorers, Shackleton, Amundsen, boy, these folks got it right. And I will tell you that on the ISS, when the crew that was supposed to join us, when their vehicle aborted, and we knew that those 2 guys were not going to be joining us, and it was just us 3 on orbit. We had actually been watching a series about Shackleton and his adventures every Saturday night. We were watching this series together. And so we took some of those lessons learned that Shackleton put forth and utilize them to maintain crew cohesion and a positive attitude on orbit. So they work. We should not ignore history. We should pay attention to these folks and hopefully utilize some of those same techniques. So with that, I'm done. And Mike, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, I thank you very much. I do have to point out that Serena is actually one of the more resilient souls that we have. So if she's saying these things, this is something to really heed well. And by the way, the crew of Crew 1 has named their spacecraft Resilience, this first operational SpaceX mission. And I think that tells you where a lot of our heads are. Now, because we've gone a little bit over, because we have people electronically, virtually knocking at the door for the next session, I do want to give them some time. I'm going to sadly call it here. However, we will make available a summary of some of the relevant literature and web links that are relevant to the information that was presented today. And we'll very much do so with an eye to the questions that we've received and didn't get a chance to answer. They've been recorded both by me and the Baker Institute folks. And we will work with the Baker Institute in linking this to the website along with the recorded sessions. I'm not sure what that'll look like, but I'll just let you know that we'll get that out for you. So a lot of amazing information. I was furiously taking notes. There's a lot more to look for on all of these fronts, and I really appreciate the panel's inputs today. This was definitely the bright spot of the week here. And again, thank you for Mr. Abbey and the Baker Institute for hosting this. So with that, we'll say goodbye from New Frontiers, and we'll yield the floor to the next session.